Good afternoon. I'd like to call this meeting to order of the Harbor Shellfish Advisory Board, Tuesday, September 3rd. 5:05. Can we have an approval of tonight's agenda?
Motion to approve.
We have a second. Motion made by Mr. Anderson, seconded by Mr. Brace to approve tonight's agenda. All in favor? Mr. Brace.
Aye.
Mr. Anderson.
Aye.
Mr. Bossy.
Aye.
Already seen the minutes, August 6th. Any revisions? Motion to approve them.
So moved. Second.
Motion's made by Mr. Brace, seconded by Mr. Anderson to approve the draft minutes of August 6th, 2024. All in favor, Mr. Anderson,
Aye.
Mr. Brace, Mr. Bossy.
Aye.
Side. Everybody seen July 16 minutes? Any
Mr. Chairman,
revisions?
I'm sorry, I wasn't at that meeting. I don't think we were gonna have a majority to vote on that.
Okay, thank you.
I wasn't there either.
Draft sediment transport study and dredging plan open house is tomorrow. Is it 6 o'clock at Full Fairgrounds?
Yes, tomorrow, 6 to 8 p.m.
Sure.
Sean.
And there's also a climate change just before that discussion, presentation. That is that Great Harbor Yacht Club.
I heard it's
Starting
sold
at-
out and there's a waiting list.
Ah, wow.
You have to pay to get in.
No, you have to register, but there were 125 spots and then I heard there's 75 on the waiting list. I don't know.
They could just ran it.
Yeah.
It doesn't cost anything. So they say it's sold out. What does that mean?
There's, I guess,
Their
set number of
capacity.
seats.
Max the seating capacity, probably.
I was gonna go, but I'm like,
I
well,
think you
just-
should go.
what?
Just go.
Just stick your head in there. Go right ahead, Pete. Okay, and that starts at, is it 4? 4. 6:30 goes from 4 to 6:30, so those kind of overlap a little, about a half hour, but anyhow. Marine Department report. Natural Resources report.
Go first.
Sure, mine's very short. We are working on a scope for an eelgrass management plan, so that we can get that hopefully funded and put together this winter, ready to go for next summer. We are currently holding eelgrass seeds, until October, and then we're going to be doing a coordinated planting. We are still collecting our spat bags that will continue through the end of October. And Friday, we get ready to start our 3 weeks of surveys, which this year will include Mattakit and Tuckernook as well. So we've got over almost 60 dive surveys to do. And Jeff, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, it's just gonna expand a little bit on the sediment transport study and dredge plan open house. So I know we've talked about it briefly before, but what that study essentially is looking at, again, both harbors, both Mattakit and Nantucket Harbor, and with Nantucket Harbor, obviously, Bulbous Harbor. And looking at how sediment moves around the harbor, where it deposits, where it erodes from, a little bit of shoreline change, but also using the bathymetry in there. And the purpose of the meeting is to kind of present the initial bathymetric results and what the results of kind of the sediment transport modeling looks like for people to see. And that part will probably take about 20 minutes to half an hour to kind of run through what the methods were to determine that and explain it, and then have a little bit of questions. And then the second half, at a minimum, the last hour is designed to just give people an opportunity to, whether it's on maps or orally, give feedback on areas that they feel are in need of dredging, either for navigational purposes, material that they're seeing accumulate, for whatever reason people are interested in it, to kind of take a little broader net and some of the spots, some of the suggestions we've already had, like Easy Street Basin, Holders Harbor entrance channel, again, I know has some issues. With some other spots in the harbor, so if you certainly have ideas, or people that are interested, or people that use the water a lot. We're really just looking for feedback to help try and prioritize those, and then the end result is to hopefully have a 10-year plan with permits. So we're not looking for, we're just gonna set it up and be ready to go for the next 10 years for dredging, and hopefully what makes the most sense need wise, and also makes the most sense as far as sediment using and where we might be able to beneficially reuse that for coastal protection. That's it.
Good.
In a nutshell.
Been waiting to hear this. It's nice to see that it's
We're close.
together, yeah.
So hopefully by this time next year, have permits in hand to do all of that. And start to do some much needed dredging.
Have areas of priority been selected?
No, that's what this, again, the purpose of this is to, I think we've seen neat areas for navigation and, been in consultation with like the harbor master's office and those folks. But to also get some firsthand accounts of where people are having significant issues. And try to see where the overlap is as far as priority for navigation goes. And then obviously, we'll also overlay the most recent, eelgrass surveys for how we're gonna be able to lay those out, or if we need to tweak some small areas and do some slight adjustments to avoid eelgrass areas if we can. Or maybe to identify areas that are good for mitigation if we do have to impact the small area of eelgrass for the navigational channel. It's kind of the hopes. To make these decisions with actual information and not just what I feel would be kind of the intention.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, question.
Mr. Grace.
From the last meeting, October 6th, August 6th. Bobby was talking about some draggers finding dark colored bay scallops in an area called Turconuck Shoal. Where is that?
Where he pointed, it's just basically off the east side of Tuckernuck. Right where the sand meets the dark water, basically, just off that edge.
So like between Turconuck and those temporary sandbars out in there.
I think it's further out, like it's beyond the sandbars, like more towards the center.
Did you say it was 25 feet of water?
Yeah, he said it was deep.
But some in Nantucket Harbor is 25 feet. So
Not really dredging there though, for scallops, like in that deep muck area.
like on the average day, when guys go out and they're dredging, how deep are they dredging?
Say 10 feet, but I mean, the line is long because they're obviously like dredging behind the
Yeah.
boat, but. I know Bobby had mentioned modifying the dredges.
Because I know in years past, there've been times when that area was just off of Turconuck was really good. A lot of guys going out there.
Yeah, I'm hoping to hop in the water and take a peek at a few spots while we're over there.
Okay.
Sounds good. Any other questions, comments on natural resources report? From the public? And, jump right into old business, continued review and update of shellfish regulations.
I received a few edits and comments. And then we sent the recommendation of the change in the town bylaw for the regulation for the bushel limit, to be flexible throughout the year based on our surveys and under the recommendation of the Natural Resources Department and the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board. And so they understood what we were asking and they sent it to town council to see if it was legal and what needed to be finished. And it looks like everything is fine, but we still need to go ahead and post it for a public hearing. And we need 3 weeks to do that. So as soon as it gets posted, 3 weeks will go by, then we'll be on the agenda for a public hearing. And hopefully that will be agreed upon, and then we'll just wait for the surveys to come in and decide how we want to proceed. But I don't see a timing issue with that. As soon as we get it advertised ASAP, I'd like to get a sense of the board, not this board, but the select board, to make sure that they would be in favor of it before we go through the process.
What do you think that might be? You individual talking to individual select board members outside of the meeting, just to,
I think I would probably reply to Libby and see what she recommended. You know, I don't think it should be an issue because it could go either way, and they have the opportunity to say yes or no based on the information given them.
right? Probably in their best interest to go with it at the outset.
But I think, if I may, I don't want to interrupt on it. To not confuse the issue. The existing code of the town, so the bylaws of the town that we adopted town meeting. They allow for the select board to set limits as they see fit, right? So they already have this exact authority to do what we're talking about. The problem came in is in the regulations that the select board specifically adopts, right? So the bylaws adopted through town meeting, and that's why it's broad. The select board's regulation specifically says a limit of 5 bushels. So to adjust that limit is a regulatory change. So what we've all collectively put forward is to simply say they are still maintaining that authority, but they have to set that limit on a year-to-year basis and also have the ability to alter that limit based upon what we're being seen. And when we sent that to town council, they didn't have any issue with that. I think we find similar regulations in other fisheries where it's more of a dynamic limit in the sense of if people are catching resource and they're not impacting the habitat negatively and people are getting it, you can adjust up, or if people aren't getting it and they're doing damage to the habitat, you can adjust the other way for what people are seeing. But instead of having a hard and fast, it's based upon information that can be collected and then reviewed and then performed. So I just didn't make that clear as much, but
But it still has to, so basically it just has to be a regulation change that they buy into.
Yeah.
That gives them more flexibility, right?
yeah, and I think in my experience with this current setting board, they're very much into having flexibility to respond to current conditions. I think it's kind of in keeping with what they've been trying to do. Not just with Shellfish, but with other things.
Sure. So with the flexibility, if they increase it to 6, can they drop it down in a month to 5 if they wanted to? Or do they
Yeah.
have, is it yearly, it stays in place until something dramatic happens?
No, they would have the ability to alter it based upon like a recommendation from Chad. So there would still be a process. They can't like wake up on a Wednesday morning and walk into a meeting and be like, tired of hearing developers, we're drop it to 2, right? Doesn't work like that. Is there still a process, but right now, there's not even a process that's available. So I think like at the end of last year, a lot of guys were saying that we're still seeing lots. And we ran to the end of the season and there was talks of upping bushel limits and things that there really just wasn't a mechanism to legally do that.
And then prior to that, they extended the season, which isn't exactly easy either. So,
Extending seasons are tricky because state law also governs the season from when it goes to and from, and you have to get special relief from the state to that. For bushel limits, it's a little bit less tricky because the state bushel limit is 10 bushels per fisherman. So as long as you're inside that number, we can't allow like 15 bushels per individual because that's less restricted from the state. It's not permitted. So you gain a lot more flexibility.
yes. Good, that's what I think we're all hoping to hear. Any other questions or comments?
One, just in general, Sarah, do you think we're like earlier in the summer, you had like we asked you when you wanted all this done. Do you think we're on schedule?
I think, I think at the last meeting, we had talked about doing it in blocks or phases. And so I think we're on schedule for that. I don't think everything is gonna get done in time. So we'll have to kind of prioritize what we want. And it seemed like the bushel limit and sensitive habitat areas were kind of a priority. And then, you know, like stuff like trying to figure out the recreational tracking and landings. I feel like that's gonna be a little bit of a trickier process and one of you mentioned that Jim Sherlin had some ideas about compensation, like I think that's gonna hold things up too, so I think like doing it in blocks and phases might be better. So that we can have these side conversations and get a consensus of what would work best between the town and the fishery. But those are my thoughts. I'm gonna try and push through as much as I can, so it's not like we're always at the select board meeting trying to get approvals, but I just want to make sure that the flexibility for the landings was in there, because it seems like the most important thing.
Has anything been discussed on, in your department, on going back to a voucher system for compensation?
I think at this point, we really haven't talked about it
Yeah.
too much. We've been kind of focused on the first part, and then obviously there've been a lot of other non-shellfish and things going on in the world for us.
Yes.
But I think that's something that we had kind of slated up for fall and winter this year to kind of finish that discussion off.
Right. He had a lengthy suggestion, Jim did, on this, and yeah, he's been very diligent going through the regulations and coming up with some great ideas that may or may not be implemented, but he has a coupon proposal, and if we're gonna be discussing this, I'll let him read it off at the next meeting. We'll be continuing discussion on
Okay,
this for sure.
yeah, and if he has anything he wants to send to us ahead of time so we can
Yeah,
prepare,
yeah,
that'd be helpful too.
yeah. He needs, all right, we need to get Jim all the addresses, I believe. So he needs to send this out to everybody, a suggestion, I'm sure, if he doesn't have that. All right, I'll save the time from reading that in, then at this point. Anything else on the shellfish regs? Tonight,
Oh, wait,
yes,
so. Will we then be considering the shellfish regs at our next meeting, or is there things that you're gonna do? That was I not paying attention? Things you're gonna do? Are you all set? You don't need anything from us?
I don't think I need anything. The only other thing that is in question that needs to be reviewed is the aquaculture section. And I don't know if we wanna wait and do that separately, or if we wanna try to,
Can we just get? Maybe we should just have a workshop meeting and get all of the aquaculture people in this room. Pick a day when it's too windy to go out or whatever it is and get everybody here. Because it's their fishery. It can't be that just a couple of guys show up and are the ones that represent the others. They should all be here, I think. I mean, we're here for them. If they don't show up, then we're gonna run out of time, and then we're gonna, decide for them. So if we can reach out to them and say, hey, on this date, we're having a meeting, please, everybody be there. This is your.
all right,
But would that be soon? Do you think we would make a workshop meeting out of the next meeting to get that done? Or would you like, or do you think that should be in between meetings?
I think in between meetings, maybe.
Or,
do that.
or also because we're coming out of, are we coming out of the oyster season? I mean, I know I've seen, no. How much longer?
usually till December 15th.
Christmas.
Yeah.
But enough to say that the regulation probably won't take effect until the next season, right?
Right,
So we do have time,
yeah,
right? So, okay,
And they're still gonna be obviously subject to town council's review too, so there'll be a little bit of time that if
so that
there's some additional.
we get the stuff done that we can get done and make
Okay.
some time for that special meeting.
Okay.
That's what I think.
I like that.
Our next meeting this month coincides with special town meeting, so, chances are we will not meet September 17th.
Not sure, I don't even know if they'll post it for it.
Right,
I think that's kind of a annual town meeting, special town meeting.
Yeah.
It's the kibosh on all other meetings.
they always wins on our day, so. Which is fine, okay, so, next item, if there's nothing left on shellfish regs for tonight.
You know,
I don't,
So that the health inspector, Sean Reed, emailed me and said he wouldn't. It's hard to understand his message. He said he wouldn't be coming to the meeting, but he didn't really give a reason. He said that we handled it at the last meeting and he doesn't need to be here, is basically what I heard. He said that we all now have access to those reports. So I don't know. I didn't see him from when I left Shells until I came here, so I didn't have a chance to say, WTF, So,
Are there any updated reports, or is it just?
well, I heard that I heard that there were 3 other incidents, but I didn't get confirmation on that, so. I didn't look at the reports since then, but I was expecting him to come here. Do you know,
I haven't talked to Sean.
but have you heard that there were 3 other additional incidents?
I only have the reports of the ones that he sent around, so,
Okay,
but that's information that we get from health, so. I would not want to speculate one way or the other. Sorry.
So, anything anybody would like to mention on this one? Anybody from the board? Matt, please.
I was just, that was one of the things that I was curious about attending this meeting for, was to find out what the health department, what Sean was gonna say about those illnesses, because I have the 3 reports for the first 3 illnesses. And then I was told on the doc several weeks later that there were additional 3 illnesses. And that affected pretty significantly the way that I decided to move forward with my farm. Pretty much anticipating an imminent shutdown of the entire fishery for everybody, and now all of a sudden, it seems like those 3 illnesses. I don't know whether there were 3 more illnesses, or I don't really know, so I was hoping to get a little bit of illumination on that issue, because it has had a huge effect on my farm.
well, when I first invited him to the meeting, he said his intent was just to come here and read the reports into the record. And then be available for questions. So I don't know, he was pretty, forthright and adamant about clearing up anything being here. So I was surprised when I saw his email saying he wasn't coming, so.
Reach out to him directly, maybe,
What?
reach out to him directly, maybe.
Well, I'm there 3 days a week, so I can certainly go in there and, sit in his chair until he shows up or whatever, you'll see him. But I don't understand why he wanted to come so badly and then now he's not here, so. I mean, he's right over there, you can go there yourself and ask
No,
him.
that's what I'm saying. Is it something where I could knock on his door?
Yeah, you can go right in there, right?
I think so.
Just public official.
Get an appointment.
They have 2 hooples now, so it's a little intimidating. You can't see over.
We'd certainly love to have an update on it as well. Yeah, so thanks for bringing that up, and if you find out something. We welcome you to share it with us, so
Okay.
thanks. Any other discussion then on the health department report? Next up is discussion on Sean Fitzgibbon's oyster lease and aquaculture leases in general. As you know, Mr. Fitzgibbon has been, trying to, let's say, innovate, and he may have some information to share with us on what he'd like to do and move forward with to enhance his oyster production. Best way I can think of it at the moment. Would you like to open up with a presentation? Sure. Sean?
Um. Basically, what I told you guys last meeting was, my request to utilize the overwintering space and to, if possible, extend or shift that parameter to include the small portion of tidal shoreline there. That is basically the, extent of what I'm asking for. You guys want to read anything about? Organized some notes. I just printed out 5 copies. I didn't really know who all was gonna be here. Peter. You can read that or take your own time. But happy to answer any questions if you guys have specifically. I also got more recent clarification from the DMF. Regarding their standpoint on the site. And that it's basically is. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that had a lot more to it.
Yeah, that's what I'm on it. I didn't print out a bunch of these, sorry, because my sensor is running on ink, but. Basically, I can read it out.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry for the delay in getting back to you. In order to extend the site to include use of the tidal shoreline, DMF will require that it be proposed at a public meeting, be surveyed by DMF, and go through the permitting process like a new site, period. Speaking to the currently permitted overwintering site, the time of year use restriction is not something imposed by DMF, period. If the town is willing to allow year-round use at this site, DMF would have no objection. Please let me know if you need any additional clarification on DMF's stance about the site. Thank you. So that's basically over the many conversations I've had on the phone with them, what they've been telling me, and I was trying to reiterate. I hope that maybe is worth something towards this request. If, it's possible to move towards a public hearing, towards a select board approval, whatever it takes. Obviously open and hoping for any advisement or guidance from your departments if this is something that you think is gonna be an issue in any standpoint or relativity to the island or our other shell fishermen here. I'm not obviously trying to do any harm to harbor. I just feel like aquaculture is a good thing in general. Like I said, I don't know if you guys have any specific questions, please.
All right, well, thanks, Sean. I simply, my questions, if this clarifies, a question for me was, is this in local hands or state hands? And it sounds like the area was approved by the state to be used year round, and it's a restriction imposed by the town of Nantucket to be a winter over, and there are some reasons for this, and I just simply like to hear it out in the open. glad the other guys have made it in, Simon and Matt, Rafe. Chuck, Brooke, all right,
Mr. Parker.
okay,
What's your name?
Brooks Roby.
Brooks Roby, okay.
thanks. So, Sean showed me some pictures of what his, operation looked like in the shallow water. And, I can see actually where some question would rise, with your gear completely out of the water. I was under the impression that it remains submerged, so, but still in shallow water. So as far as the regulatory end of it goes, what can you share with us, Jeff?
Sure, well, I'll try to go through it again, and I brought some stuff to help. You guys had asked the last time I was here. For some of the people and for myself, and then I guess we'll cut the pile in half. This one,
Here, I'll just send it to you.
yes,
Or at least it's part.
I do, I have the hard copy on my computer.
you don't get what's gonna have. And then for the stuff that Sean gets to,
Sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt you.
oh no, go ahead, I was gonna say, we're
I
happy
was
to
just
scan
saying,
that
you
in.
know, I didn't, the notes officer, I'm not trying to like put down hard scientific facts. Okay, so if there's question regarding that, give it a little flexibility.
So just to kind of walk everyone through a little bit and a little bit of history, we've been doing a little bit of digging ourselves. On some of these, so it's in the packet here and I'll go through each piece a little bit, but essentially what we have is. The first section here is kind of the best management practices that we've been using for shellfish culture in southeastern Mass. It's a little bit of an older publication, but it's still the valid one. It's the one that the DMF uses, and I'll get to a couple of points on that for how we've gotten to where we've gotten in a few of these spots. Kind of the second attachment here is just a regular GIS map of the overwintering site and area. I apologize that our prints are heading, but we are running low on coloring, so it came out in black and white instead, so, I'll send it around for everyone to color again, but it's just highlighting the parcel that fronts this is a parcel that's owned by the Nantucket Conservation Foundation. And that'll be important in a minute. And then the last part are some materials that I've circulated before, just some of the sites and areas where they're located, the timing when they were approved in 2013. It includes some of the, and we're missing some pages. So I'll send this around digitally because some of them, I got stuck in copy, but, some of these areas that went through were approved, and then some of the requests at the end, were originally submitted with dates, and then those dates were memorialized in the approvals. And I apologize for missing like the front page of some of these letters that go through. But what's important in a couple of the cases is it also identifies that they license and operation of individual private shellfish aquaculture projects for the purpose of overwintering oysters within the proposed shellfish aquaculture area. They go through the legal reference. So just to kind of walk through a little history on this and then kind of where we are currently. When we originally did the expansion, right? So back in 2012, 2013, when this first came up, the areas that were only available for grow out at that time were the original block in the head of the harbor, the original 40 acres that were there. And then the other spot that was available was the spot in Pockwell Meadows. Where Mr. Foley had been before, and now Simon and Emil have leases that are there. And there's a lease that's sanded out, that's no longer available. And then long ago, there had been an area in Pulpus Harbor in West Pulpus that had since, kind of been abandoned and required reapproval. The town working with the guys that were currently licensed or within the program to license and that were looking for expansion, because at the time, most of them either only had a 4 acre site in the head of the harbor or kind of a singular site. I know at the time, Mr. Edwards had a 6 acre site. And then one in Pocomo, it's kind of the outlier of the group, and then the rest were these 4 acre sites that are the squares. They've been reconfigured a little bit over time, but, that's essentially it, the kind of the southwestern portion. The town petitioned for the new section, and then the overwintering sites and had those come out and be resurveyed. So at the time, we went through and again, I apologize for not having this handy the last time. It took me a while to dig some of this out. At the time when we had been looking at it, the issue that exists for intertidal sites is there's some case law in and around intertidal sites where you essentially require the abutting property owner to provide some level of consent for use of that property. There's some ownership issues and that aquaculture is not an identified intertidal zone right. So to not bore everyone to pieces, intertidal zone rights are like the famous Chapter 91 fishing, bounding, navigating. Some people like to include strolling, or not. But as the town doesn't own that area for some of these overwintering sites, they were left as subtitle because that eliminates that as an issue. So I think as far as intertidal goes and access by the shore, until some point, the Conservation Foundation grants the ability to utilize that area in that fashion. I think we're kind of dead in the water on that just because it's their property, right?
Is that conservation land or is that trustees land?
Trustee, I'm sorry,
Oh, no, I was gonna say that piece there, is owned by the foundation. Yeah.
so now,
Yep, so the green triangle that's there is the section that borders the overwintering sites.
Did I see that, Peter?
Yep.
And green is color coded as
as what they own. It's one of the
trustees.
No, there's the Conservation
Yeah,
Foundation.
and then if you look at, sorry, it's in the little pack too, the overwintering sites here, the A's here. You can see the property line run in, and those areas are to the south, so they're fronted onto the Conservation Foundation land, so I think they'd have to be involved in any conversation about that. Because it's their property that would be impacted, so,
Can I add something?
sure,
So I took the liberty of calling the Conservation Foundation and talking to Jim Carberg today to see. And she didn't even know that there was overwintering sites there and figured that it was something that happened during Jim Monkowski's time. And couldn't give me a yes or no, said that that would be a thing that Formac would definitely want to know about. But something that we should all be aware of is that the Trustees Reservations and the Conservation Foundation a couple of years ago engaged a Woods Hill whole group to do strategic coastal resilience planning for the refuge. And they identified Second Bend and the east end of Cascada Pond and the east side of Haulover Pond, and then up on the narrowest point of the Gulls as places where they want to do some sort of nature-based resiliency projects. So I'm sure that means building up sand dunes and planting vegetation. But it also means possibly putting an oyster reef at the mouth of Haulover Pond, which could get in the way of whatever might be done there. So just so you know, you may want to reach out to them. We may want to reach out to them to find out what's what.
yeah, that's what I'm saying, I think they would need to be engaged in any sort of conversation about making that change.
Yes.
Is this the property line you're looking at? For conservation,
Yes,
the site that I'm specifying isn't within that. It's northwest of Haulover Creek, closer towards Cascada. So I'm pretty sure that would be on trustees' land, if that's in question. I've spoken with the trustees, the head of the department here, Diane, extensively about this. And she could not be any more in support of what I was doing there and potentially using that as an oyster site.
well, I'm not gonna argue out property lines for where it is.
Neither am I, but that's obviously a very important point to come across. It seems that the Conservation Committee and Jen Carberg is, from my understanding, very much in support of oysters. She loves oysters. She's been kind of pushing the whole oyster reef in Medowee Creek. You know, I agree. If it could become an issue in what they're hoping to build up, or if it could even be is in, I don't know, conjunction, if they want to put an oyster reef there, I want to put an oyster reef there. Maybe it's a good thing.
But something to know about that. Basically, what the study revealed was they did with the Woods Hole Group is that side of the island is migrating into the harbor. Which means if they put a berm of sand, they add sand to what's there, eventually that's gonna come into and maybe cover up. I don't know, the area that you're working, I'm just saying.
Yeah, no, I'm hearing you.
But, and then something I don't completely understand is mean low water. And so in Massachusetts, Maine, and Texas, property owners on the shoreline own from, from where their property is down to mean low water. So does that mean an average? Does that mean at the lowest possible tide, an astronomical tide, they own all the way down there? So if we put oyster cages there, are they then trespassing on that land? And
So mean low water is a published number, right? So they establish that on a tidal epic, and they create a mean high water and mean low water, just for that very purpose, right? Because you can get fluctuations over time, right? You get fluctuations on where that may be, like by the tide. So for property line determination, they try to fix it a little bit better just to avoid that. So I think when you're looking at, intertidal and subtidal, you try to give a little bit of buffer zone to avoid those interactions, so you don't get into property ownership issues or potential, obviously to get into a situation with, licensing or easements from people. But I think for the, the public aquaculture program, you're trying to maintain that within public lands as much as possible. Or you get into areas where you're using those areas that will require either additional permitting or permissions, right? So if you get too far into that intertidal zone, you may be subjecting yourself to also requiring something like a Chapter 91 review, depending upon what you wanted to utilize in the water. I think everyone would like to avoid extra permitting if they have, especially permitting that can take as long as that. So I think in summary, without arguing about where property lines are, those property owners in that area, and if it's in question, because I think, looking at the map of the coordinates that have been issued out, the property line is pretty clearly to the north of where these are supposed to be, that you would need to engage the foundation. There's some thought that it's the trustees, they would need to be engaged. I also happen to know that in general, the foundation prohibits commercial activities on their properties.
it's with respect, it's not in general, they prohibit it. I run a business where I could do my business on their property if they would allow me, and they won't allow it. So
So that, in just full openness for everybody, that may be an ender of that discussion for that type of shift. And then obviously, to go back to the guide there, you'll see there's a kind of a chart of the approval. The approval process that's within there for the intertidal zone, and I think the email that Sean provided spells that out, that if that area was going to get utilized, it would require that additional surveying and approval to convert from subtidal to intertidal. But I think, again, we'd have to start with the property owner that's impacted by that. First,
the point I was trying to make about the berm and adding sand to the area is that as that barrier beach migrates, the property owned by the foundation can actually grow because it becomes dry land. And if they wanted to, they go to land court and argue that, our property grew, didn't erode it, it accreted. So just trying to get everything out.
Yeah, it's certainly within their rights to file accretion plans for, at any point for.
But at some point, whenever it was that these plots were picked out for overwintering for the oystermen, the foundation must have been consulted and they must have said, okay, we're good with this as it is, or whatever. They must have said something. So that's why Cormac should be called. And
Yeah. I mean, we had to provide for a number of the permitting process to go through that, you know, a butter notification for distance that's there. I'm sure they received that. And at the time, obviously in 2013, the Jim's absolutely correct. That's when Jim Lentowski was still their executive director and wasn't placed there. I'm sure they were involved. So that's the first hurdle. As far as the time of year restriction goes, that restriction was originally done, and I think we even saw that a little bit rediscussed here in the early part of June. Where that was something where that was a need that was trying to be addressed for the guys that were growing in the Upper Harbor, and they kind of reiterated an interest in leaving it overwintering. And, you know, I think our position is, you know, currently it's set up and leased as overwintering sites. If there's a change to be made, then the growers who are impacted also need to come to some level of, you know, majority decision that they want to utilize it differently, because we're not gonna piecemeal approvals for folks. It just doesn't make sense to do. It creates a unequitable situation for folks if everyone's leases read differently for what is allowed and not allowed in an area where, you know, things can be subject to transfer. So through the years, we've maintained it as overwintering. We think the state approval also permits it as overwintering when we read through it, and then we've provided that a number of times. And we're always happy to work with the growers on what helps them. I mean, I'm sure in the coming months, we're probably gonna have lots of discussions around things like bird deterrence, where, you know, what's working, what's not working, what's gonna be the environment around that, and trying to work collectively to solve issues that are, you know, are problematic. You know, we used to have kind of an annual growers meeting to get together. I think and we indicated this in June, happy to reconvene that now that, you know, these guys aren't slowing down for another few months, but once everyone has a chance to kind of catch their breath and figure out, take tally on what's going on, if there are adjustments or changes that need to get made, then, you know, we're happy to work with the growing community on what their needs are. What we do.
How are these split up? Are you at the northernmost point?
No, I'm in the middle. I'm next to Simon and I don't know, Mac, I think, or maybe Matt. It's,
Yeah, so those are 2-acre parcels that run through there, right? And these guys are all of the growers are capped,
I think it's the second or third in from the right.
but these were divvied up. This was an original 12-acre site, and it was carved into 6 2-acre sites. So everyone would have in theory, the same area available to them for overwintering if they wanted to get these leases. That's kind of the history on what got us here and some of the steps to move forward. And I think we always appreciate when people take the time to put information together. And are happy to discuss it, but that's kind of where we are right now.
Simon, please.
Yeah, Sean, just in the beginning, the DMF said if you want it, we go ahead with this, they're coming back to survey the whole site or just your site? Or the intertidal area?
If they were gonna open a space that's outside of the overwintering zone, which is what I'm requesting, the shoreline, they would have to re-inspect the shoreline.
Just the shore, not the entire area. I guess,
Understand, it would just be that portion of your.
I mean, just to be, so everyone's very clear, the reason I started this whole thing to get that in the beginning because we have really high expenses to sink all that freaking deer at the top of the park. We have paid divers to go down. We're at the shore, you know, the catch is by the shore and go, okay?
Gonna get you to come closer so we can
So
hear.
you got here, okay, so we're really sort of like, we don't have any control on our ceilings. I'm not willing to dive in that headwork, that area at the head of the harbor. It's also very expensive and it takes a lot of time away at the, you know, where the weather is good, where the dive can come, all this kind of stuff. And it's like, we have a timeline, we need to get that stuff down for, you know, because we don't want ice to hit, the weather to get really shitty, and we don't want to be up there. The other part is my pole sleeve is so shallow in the winter, that if I left all my gear in that, it would probably get killed by cold temperatures on super low tides. So my biggest issue with this whole thing is not that Sean can do whatever he wants in there. I don't really, you know, that's not really the point of it. The point is that if the DMF came back in and said, hey, sorry, we found scallops in this area, we're canceling this area, I'm gonna be in big doo-doo. And I mean, I don't know if you understand that, Sean, but that's, what am I gonna do with 200 cages?
I mean, there's scallop seed everywhere.
Correct. And so that's the
It's all
danger
over
of them
the
coming
site,
right
it's all
now.
over
You know, when
everybody's
they did it, it was, they found nothing in there.
site. And it could blow right out the next time,
Correct.
so.
So, but this is my problem. So, you know, if you guys are gonna, okay, go ahead with this is great. But what would happen? Where would I stand if they close that area? And they're not gonna go, oh, Simon, you got 2 years to do this. They're gonna go, we're closing this area. The MF doesn't like give you, oh, you got 6 months, 9 months, a year to do this. We'll find another area. But to say it's closed, that's the law. So there is my issue with any of this part of it. If they're just gonna look at the dry land, great, that's okay. But if they come in and resurvey everything, there's a good chance that if they did it this year, they would be in trouble.
Well, so. If there's a concern that DMF will react this way if they find,
Scallops,
Growth there.
eelgrass, razor clams.
and what's happening on the local end as far as that? And I was under the impression any oyster farming has to be done over a dead bottom. And is that not monitored locally? Do we kind of just, you know, not rock the boat and,
So, yeah, I mean, in all honesty, once an area qualifies, we're not asking the DMF to come back and resurvey, right? Once it's getting worked, it's getting worked. I mean, I think anyone that's gone to any of these leases, that over time, you're putting shellfish on the site, you're inevitably gonna lose some shellfish through a cage, something's gonna happen. Other stuff may move in, you know, obviously, if you let your sit a long time and stuff grows on it, you may start to collect other things in there too. But that's why we also don't go to resurvey areas, because once they're qualified and permitted, unless the Division of Marine Fisheries takes the initiative to go and do other work, I've never heard of them seeking to just do that on their own, to go back and reevaluate. So yes, you're correct. When those were initially established, I don't know if I used the word dead zone, but they qualify because they have less than a certain amount of shellfish of any species per square meter and are devoid of eelgrass. Those are the two big criteria that are there. I mean, obviously, places like Nantucket, where there have been a lot of efforts towards improving water quality and establishing eelgrass, may have some that comes back in from time to time, right? If they do it, you know, they dive these transects with DMF divers that go through to make those determinations, and then they come back up and they make that determination for if it qualifies.
thanks, Jeff. Tom?
I just want to mention like one consideration, because I was just going through what it took for the approvals the first time around and the amount of abutters. It's not just, you know, people that own property adjacent to the leases, it's whoever is visually impacted as well. So it went all the way from Pocono Point up to the last house. So yeah, but I think it was also for that. I think that you would have to go through that process again. You know, and I think that you would have, there could be an opportunity for people to change their mind also about how they felt about aquaculture in that area. Not, I don't know for sure, but it would have to be, you'd have to reopen that.
Yeah, I mean, it requires a public hearing to do, so it requires public notice. To go from subtitle to intertitle.
Can, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
can we hear from the others in the room who are here on the subject, Matt? Mac, of course, I know you're not a, but, and then John, if you want, but if we. It's rare that we get so many fishermen in here. We've had a lot of meetings where there've been fishermen, showing up, and that's been great, but, you know, we need your input, so. We kind of heard a little bit of where Matt's standing is, but, I mean, I'm a the only shell fishing I do is for cohogs and scallops. I'm recreational, so. I wanna know how you guys feel about what he's proposing, because we can't just go on what he says. We need to know if you guys are gonna be impacted. And all the information that we're putting out here is so we can make a good decision, so we don't just go, oh yeah, let's do it, so.
Matt?
I was just gonna say, we wanna start here, this end of the room. My feeling on this is, as we've all just discussed. Nothing about any of this process is slam dunk. There's a lot of risk involved in having this reviewed again. If there's a bunch of I mean, I think we got lucky when they let us have it the first time around because there were no shellfish present. And I do recall during the meetings that we had at the selectmen that several scholars showed up and were very concerned, myself included. And this was before I was even really doing agriculture because I didn't start until 2013. So when the overwintering sites were approved, I didn't have a whole lot of experience. I was more of a scholar than I was an aquaculturist. And I caught plenty of limits over there along that beach. And when they proposed making that an aquaculture site, I was like, wow, you're gonna take that away from the scallopers. A lot of scallopers showed up to those selectmen's meetings and said, catch scallops there on a fairly regular basis. What are you guys gonna do when there's a huge set of scallops in there? What are you gonna do? And I think if you go back and you listen to the minutes of those meetings, you'll hear some of the proposals that were made, like, well, one group or another would have to vacate. If there were scallops there, the oyster farmers would have to leave, let the scallopers go in and catch the scallops, and then they could go back, or the oyster people could move all of the scallops out of that area. And then there wouldn't be anything to catch anyway, so you could solve it that way. But there was no real consensus on what should be done if such a situation arose. And this year, I think that you're probably gonna have that situation because there's a lot of scallops everywhere. We all know that it's gonna be a banner year. It's hard not to find scallops right now. So if the DMF came out today, they'd take a look at that area and they'd say, none of this it meets the criteria. And not anybody in this room can say what the implication of that would be. They could very well say, sorry, this area has changed. And by asking for this, you roll the dice. And now, again, and that's why I think everybody's worried. Because right now we have something. And all the people who've been farming for a while, it's something of value that you don't gamble with. And that's, I think, the position of most of the growers that have been doing what they do. And I'll be the first to admit, I'd love an intertidal zone. I'd love one. I'm struggling out there in the deep water. It's hard to not have a shallow place to do some of the work for you. If this was approved, it would benefit me greatly. And I would do just what Sean wants to do. The only reason that I didn't is because it wasn't allowed, because it was an overwintering site. And I still don't think it's gonna be tolerated, and at this point, I wouldn't take the risk. Because it would have a negative effect on the group of fishermen that have already been making a living doing this for a decade.
Can I ask,
Please do it, Peter.
so. If it could work for you, it would work for you, but then. If all the oyster farmers want to go in there, and it would benefit them, then where would be the overwintering site? Where would that be?
That's the worry, is if everybody were to do the intertidal growing over there, then I think the public would have something to say about it, because it would be not, 50 or 60 feet of frontage or whatever that acreage is. I know that all those sites are much longer than they are narrow along the coastline. So maybe it's 50, I mean, how many feet is it, Sean? How many feet of frontage do you get?
Hardly, not even, it's maybe 60 yards, 50 yards, 60 yards.
Is it even that much? I mean, that's like, that's all it is. Yeah, that's perfect. 50 or 60 yards.
I mean, the thing about it is this, we're talking about inside area. There's still a whole bunch of acreage behind where it's deep. Okay, when we overwinter, we don't worry about densities or any of that stuff. It's just to keep it out or getting frozen. Just keep it over winter. Oysters are pretty much just sitting there, maintaining themselves. So in my acreage, I could stuff 1,000 cages and still use the front of that area. Because what Sean is using is the front, what he uses like first 50, 60 feet in that area. Maybe going on. Yeah, you should them backwards.
No, it was only what was, accessible at the low tide, basically. was given.
So it's not that Sean is not using, he's only using, right now, he's only using a fraction.
Was only.
It was, sorry, it was only using a fraction of what is the area itself. You understand that? It's not like suddenly Sean would be putting 500 cages what he like, but he wouldn't be generally using the, whereas that correct? You do
Not
some of it,
unless
but
you could develop a better system to work in that area.
Yeah.
That would work towards less birds landing on floating gear, making it somewhat shallow. Subtidal area usable for us. Something that could be open year round or harvest, from what I understand. All the cages are supposed to be sunk by December 15th, and there's no harvest out of that overwintering zone. So how are we supposed to harvest oysters in the winter time legally? That's a big question also I have with this request. I feel like it would, I understand their concerns, they don't want to lose their sites. However, that's kind of a far toss. If there's scallop seed there, why can't we go and move it like we move all the scallop seed around the harbor in the winter time? I don't think the DMF is out to shut us down by any regard. Why would they want to do that?
And the other ways, so Sean, at the June 18th meeting, you said you were in the process of moving everything out of there and putting that in deep water. And it's a long, hard process. And you were asking us for, if we could, give you an extension to September 1. Jeff had said July 1. We said, let's try and get them September 1. But then in August 6th, you come back and say, the current plan is what you want to do. But you also said you wanted to get your additional 4 acres that the town was holding up for you. And so I'm confused. Are you wanting to grow all your oysters in that spot, in the overwintering spot, and nothing in the deep water? And if that's the case, does that mean you're gonna have 10 acres right there in that spot? Or are you still gonna have some stuff out in the deep water and you're gonna grow some of the stuff there?
I would ideally like to utilize the deep water acreage that was proposed for me, because it's very advantageous to get the feed that's available to the seed out in the deep water there. It grows beautiful oysters. There's no debate about that. It's really difficult to work that area because of the exposure to wind directions. What I found to be a very successful way of handling the seed was to let it grow fast and then slow it down by air drying it, give it all the benefits that the shoreline is feeding it. And that way also make the best of both sites, essentially.
So have your 8 acres, right, out in the deep water. But the only thing that's different is that your 2 acre plot
Would be usable.
would be usable. Is there? And if you couldn't do that, would that kill you? Because because other oyster farmers are doing it that way. They're doing their 8 acres and they're using their 2 in the wintertime.
I would make note that, Simon Mack, they have a great working partnership. They are probably the largest producers on island. They utilize a very like system that I'm proposing by going into Pocomo site. I don't know exactly what they do, and I don't really need to know, but it's observed over the past 15 years of working on the water that they utilize both deep water setting, shallow water for those advantages. Emil, the Pocomo site next door, they're probably the second most productive site estimating. They can go in there and work any tide. They can get in there on the shittiest days. They go out in a little like 16-foot Carolina skiff with 8 guys, and they can put 25 bushels of oysters in that and come in when it's blowing 45 miles an hour out of the northeast. So as far as being able to work a site productively, location is completely dependent on there. Matt does a great job growing his oysters. You know, he's been doing it a long time, and I don't think anyone would argue that he has a system that works for him. I don't know what his numbers are like. I don't know how much he produces, and what I wrote in my letter as far as viability or sustainability, I think is relative to life on this island. Farmers on the mainland, they're receiving about half of what we get for our products. So the fact that we can work a season and make a living is like, those guys laugh at us in Wellfleet and up in Marshville. They're like, you guys are, I'm not real. You know, most people, this has to be a year-round job to produce a living. It's way too much work to call a hobby. No one in their right mind would do this just to go out and earn an extra $40,000 a year for the amount of work that it takes to maintain that gear, maintain the boat, maintain seed. It's a tremendous amount of work. So I know it's probably not the NRD's or any town or SHAB's prerogative to see that we make a living out of what we're doing. However, I really feel like you guys need to understand and empathize that no one's gonna do this if we can't make a living at it. It doesn't make sense. So providing, helping promote spaces that will facilitate this for myself, who knows, maybe it's down the line, it's gonna be, you know, I don't know if you guys have any children who are coming into the, you know, someone who else make this more of a possible viable operation, you know. If it's not gonna be this Cascada site, which I hear there's some hoops you're bringing up, if it's conservation, if it's trustee land, if it's a lot of paperwork, why not request another site within the harbor that's not part of the overwintering site or not abutting conservation? Why not maybe propose a site in Madigan that could be viable to use some subtidal area? And why not expand the aquacultural front to some small degree for one individual to see how it goes, maybe see what the general public feedback might be. You know, I don't see the deep water as a truly productive or viable operation, if you ask me. So I would trade 8 acres of deep water for 2 acres of tidal shallow water every day.
And so thank you for your explanation. Appreciate it a lot. There's no room over there in Pocomo Meadows? That's all taken up.
Yes.
And what about the site that's on the southwest side of the Waste Point? That I think Terry, you suggested that might be a potential spot, but it's pretty dirty over there or muddy.
It is, there's 12 acres over there.
It's not a healthy site.
Back to his question about, finding other sites, because this was brought up to me by a previous grower. That it made it sound simple, so I just would like clarification. That, you know, can he go out and find a dead bottom area that he may feel is suitable and request DMF to come over and approve acreage in a different area.
I mean, I think the short answer to that question is kind of yes. I think if someone went out and did the legwork or brought someone in to do the legwork to establish that there was an area that they felt could qualify, certainly. But I think, and I would definitely encourage people to check out the little flow chart in this. It still is what holds is ultimately the request for that survey, and that request is incumbent upon the select board to request. And that requires, obviously a public hearing to do. That's required by DMF to get someone out to do it. And then they'll come out and do that, and then you can kind of go through the rest of these steps that are there for permitting. If someone certainly wanted to go through the time, energy, and effort to do that, I mean, we certainly would never actively discourage someone from doing their own legwork. It just, it can be a lot. It's time consuming to do, and fortunately for us here, our habitat in general and our shellfish numbers in general are much better than, areas on the Cape or even some of the areas around the vineyard where to find true dead areas are not super common, and areas that can be made available where they might have other, whether it's property owner concerns or shenanigans for access or whatever there may be. It can be hard to do, but if someone certainly took it upon themselves to do that, certainly be something that they could bring forward.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Scott
Okay,
and John, then Matt. Sorry, Peter.
it's all right.
Yeah, my question was, do you currently only have 4 acres that you're actually approved for? So would Jeff, would he be able to get approval with those other 4 acres?
So, right, there are steps to do that. Sean currently has 4 acres in deep water, and then the 2-acre overwintering site is still leased. That's the area with restrictions, and to kind of clarify, the restriction on the overwintering site is simply a time of year restriction to have gear in that area. And when you can't have gear in that area, that's why it's not harvestable between May 1st and that period in November or December, because you simply aren't permitted to have gear there. So if you can't have gear, so it's a little bit funky to do. So the steps, and to kind of run everyone through, the steps for areas on a qualified site is obviously some of the things that you need is you have to be able to generate a, obviously like a production plan to show that you're gonna be able to produce and what your plan is to operate. Some of that's needed for permitting in some cases. Like when you go through your Army Corps of Engineers approval, you have to provide methodologies for them to provide approvals on. Whether they're oyster grow cages or whether they're or, some title style cage or whatever method you want to say, whatever, right? And in some cases, if you want to alter that, that requires amending that permit with them to go through, to put that together. There are, requirements for things like insurance and things that are there. You go through and you're awarded that lease through the select board issues out that license.
So where is Sean in regard to that process? Getting another 4 acres?
So Sean has indicated to us that he would like to get that 4 acres. Again, Sean submitted his production plan to us. We've been reviewing that through the summer as best we can. Hopefully at some point in the near future, if we have questions back on that plan, we'll get those back to Sean, and then it will be in front of the select board.
And Sean, you said you wouldn't work the deep water. You don't want to work the deep water. Right? So if they award you those 4 acres, would you work them? Or would you
That's
think-
all I have to use, so yes.
So you would, okay. I'm just trying to understand the business part of this. Everybody.
No, I understood I was gonna get, and I understood that transfer was on the agenda over a year ago, because it's clearly evident that space is a requirement out there, and by year 3, I need that space, absolutely. So I'm surprised to hear that there's still really no motion in that direction. I thought that was a given from signing onto the lease from year one. That was gonna be coming, in a timely fashion. That's separate from the request, for the overwintering zone.
Just trying to put pieces of the puzzle
And-
together.
and I'll be fair and saying too, this is 100% honesty. Our review for these things, we look at, obviously habitat and impacts and those things. Sean's absolutely right. Whether these guys are gonna make 65 cents an oyster, 85 cents an oyster, $200 an oyster is not something that we take into our review. The economics of it are the economics. It's the same with these kinds of permits and licenses. It's the same as, a permit that you get from the Conservation Commission, where if you want to do work, if you want to build a coastal engineering structure and put sand on top of it and keep it covered and hold that permit, if it costs you $1 billion a year, then that's what it costs. That's not part of that consideration. So we don't do it. We don't get involved with pricing of scallops that are harvested, right? Like we look at it from habitat impacts. We don't really get into the economics of it because there's no better way to mess up economics on everything to involve the government. So we'll let the market take care of itself. But
So the price of it has nothing to do with my concern, other than you guys will figure out the prices that you'll get. My concern was like understanding how many acres he had, where he was in the approval process with the other 4 acres. And to hear from him, if he got awarded those other acres, would he use them or would he want to still be in shallow water? So that's kind of heard the feedback I need.
Where does he stand with the other 4 acres?
yeah, no, so there's been a production plan, but we've also had conversations at this meeting where we've heard phrases like, I would never want to work that again, or I would never be out there. So again, we're happy to review production plans and things that go in. They take time to review and put together. I mean, it's a process that's in place. I mean, keeping in mind that these are also sites that were inherited through a revocation process that required some significant remediation to go through, and we're super appreciative of that going on and taking that burden on. And that process, I mean, just that revocation process alone played out over the period of almost 4 years to go through. And I know everyone wants it to go quickly, but it's also getting sites back into compliance, figuring out production plans, dealing with an issue this year of whether it was inadvertent or not, I mean, dealing with a situation of not being in compliance with the permit and the permits that were issued and straightening that out. I mean, all these things compound to cause delays. I apologize for everyone for it taking longer, but that's the progress.
Thanks, Joe. Mr. Logan,
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got 3 questions that are fairly simple. This overwintering site that I understand each farmer gets 2 acres to utilize in off season, winter. Do you guys actually use that in the off season? Do you actually move your stuff there?
Oh, yeah,
You do?
Yeah.
So in the winter, there's that whole, every 2 acres that you guys have is for you.
tons of care in the head, tons of long care.
It's just, I
Yeah,
wasn't quite sure. if that-
yeah. As I said, I have to move all my stuff out of bulk because you're pleased, so I have to move all that.
Okay, and you put it into your 2 acres.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you for that.
And I've also moved some of the stuff I float on top.
Yeah.
Because it's super expensive to sink the cages themselves. Floating cages, you grind divers, you grind them down, bring them up, then flip them, they have to do all sorts of stuff.
Gotcha. I'm just curious about,
Yeah.
you guys are, everybody is using their allotted 2 acres in the winter spots. As farmers allow. Okay, thank you for that. Second question. It might be for Tara or Jeff, I'm sorry to ask you back, but when was the last time a survey was done to the public about the abutters and do we know that, what year that was done? Because I'm sure a lot of those properties have turned over since then or have been subdivided or added more abutters, property owners. That's the last.
So I think it was, prior to 2014.
All right, so it's been almost a decade.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some turnover and change of ownership of those abutting properties.
When I did my permitting, which was 2011, I had to go through the Army Corps and I had 132 votes.
132 at that time, in 13.
I think it was 2011 because I think it was.
Yeah, the expansion was in 2013. Okay, great. It'd be about right.
Yeah, I still have a list of all the properties that we had to contact.
But it was 2000, so it was almost a decade ago, not long.
Yeah, it's like mine.
All right, so that's a consideration for processing. of Getting these people. Prepared. And the last question is, this best management practices for shellfish and CMAC done by Dale Levitt, version 9-048, when was that? Yeah. What was that?
I'm guessing September 2004, I'm not sure. I'd have to check.
Okay, so that. In some speculation may need to be revised as something that's
Yeah, this
20
is,
years old.
so I checked today. This is the version I re-downloaded it today from the DMS website. The one that there's.
Okay, so that's the current one that they're using, however, it being 20 years old. Okay, thank you. That's it.
And he's going to the bathroom.
I'll run later.
You're our vice chair, right?
Yes.
He said he wants Matt to go next.
Oh, I just wanted to, I guess, revisit the whole process of site selection and all that goes into that. I know that when we all started getting interested in agriculture 10, 15 years ago, whatever it was, that 60-acre site that was left over from the Harbor Life grant that was all pre-approved by the state. And everybody who needed to sign off on it was a huge advantage to all of us because a lot of the approvals that were required by us had already been taken care of in that process. So that made, you know, just carving up that 60 acres into the plots that they wanted to afford fishermen was a great help. And I don't know if I would have gotten into agriculture had it not been for that shortcut, if you want to call it that, because there still was an awful lot to do, but I was wondering if anybody in this room can remember what happened when Rob Garrison, if you recall, tried to get his own thing going there in Shimo Bend. Probably sometime in the 90s, if not the early 2000s, where he had a production plan, he had his markers out there. And I believe, from what I understand, which I'd like to compare to whatever anyone else might remember of that, why he was unable to get that permission to grow there. Was that an abutter issue? Does anybody remember what happened to Rob Garrison with that proposal?
I don't.
I would encourage you, Sean, to look into that because that might give you a good idea of what your obstacles are. Because there are obstacles that you have to figure out how to get through. And another thing that I was gonna say, just about my own personal experience with growing, when I started agriculture, I was a full-time commercial fisherman. And most of my income was derived from commercial fishing, and I chose agriculture as a means of diversification. I had no intention of giving up any of my other wild fisheries, and I always kind of built into my particular business plan that agriculture would be for the summer months, and then I would go base out, and then I would go pop fishing, and then I would do whatever waterman has to do to make a living, because that's what we do. We figure out how to make a living on the water, and it's very rarely ever one thing. So I think that when you're deciding to get involved in something that's as complicated as aquaculture, kind of have to think about that. And I know you scout too, Sean, so I would think you probably made pretty good money in it, just so you saying.
Mr. Chairman.
Peter.
Just got a few things. So. Where it slips out of my head, Jeff, you were saying that Sean had said in, when we were talking about, you were talking about him getting his additional 4 acres. So the select board said, you said at the time when we were dealing with Ted Lambert that he'd get his additional 4 acres when we saw that he was a viable, when he was actively working his lease and ready to move on and get it. And you said, you know, that you heard that he doesn't want to work deep water, he doesn't ever want to do that, but you just said, no matter what, you need that deep water to grow out, you need it because of that, because of the food. So whether you want to or not, you need it. That's what you're saying, right?
Well, it's the only space available for me, so I do need it.
Right, so let's just make sure that we all hear that. He needs that. He's working toward it, so. And then I'm just wondering how Ted did in deep water. Since before we went through that, was he doing okay? Was he able to make it work? I'm Sean, if you have that.
Ted was utilizing 9 bay cages, so each oyster bag weighs probably, you know, close to 40 pounds, maybe ideally, maybe a little less. And Ted's cages held 9 of those bags, and each bag got so overgrown due to neglect that those cages weighed upwards of 500 pounds. So his system to maximize the space available meant using these massive cages to try and hold adequate oysters on the lines. His system worked in his mind because he had electric winch and massive boom pulleys and rigs and all this, but in reality, it's so difficult to work with those large, heavy cages that was not a sustainable, what I observed, a sustainable way to farm that area, and was probably his biggest failing point. Because nobody could help him with those cages either, so.
So one more point, but it sounds like, you know, deep water is where you're gonna end up unless we can make it work for you in Cascade in the subtitle zone. So it sounds like everybody here is trying to make it work for you somehow. Just gonna take maybe a little more work than you thought. And then what about Cascade Pond? If Jamie Marks isn't working it out there, can't he? Is there space in Cascade Pond?
There's the one site in Cascade Pond, and Jamie is growing clams.
He's growing clams.
Is he selling them somewhere?
What's that?
Is he selling them? Is he landing them?
From what I've been told, he has 70,000 in there in 7 successions. He intends to start harvesting next year. 10,000 per year for the next 7 years, and whether he continues that succession, if he harvests 10,000 next summer and replants that area so that he has a constant cycle, I'm not sure. Simply what he told me personally, he had 70,000 cohogs planted in there.
And he provides us seed receipts and.
Yeah. He doesn't feel that oysters belong near cohogs either, so, but anyhow. Matt, did you have something more? Or
I was just gonna say that, I was just gonna make the point that. I mean, I'm in agreement with Sean, working with just. A deep water site, it's a tough way to make it. And if you look at the history of the deep water sites, I am the only one who currently has only the deep water site that's still in business, that started 10 years ago. That's how difficult it is. Everybody else, Ted, Andy, Gordon, Chuck. Chuck was involved with these guys, but I think also when he decided that he wanted to do his own thing, he realized that he wasn't interested in trying to make a living on his 8 acres. I don't know where he's at with his acreage at this point. But I think the record speaks for itself that deep water growing solely, unless you're ready to invest in some other kind of technology that nobody has really tried yet. I know they have the trays. My boat's never been rigged to do trays, but trays are an option. I don't know how well they work or how well they don't work. But, yeah, it's tough. I can understand Sean's reluctance to wanna go in whole hog on an 8 acre deep water site right now, because you cannot make a living doing that year round. Not even close.
John.
But that's what we all got, we signed up for that. So we sign up for that, you figure out how to make it work, or you go out of business, what happens?
Back to Tara with that, going back to the butters, you said there were 113 the last time you did that survey.
I can't recall the exact number, but I can pull it up.
Regardless, does it take just one to say no to stop? Or is there a majority?
I can't remember.
The DMF has a policy that everyone has 90 days to say what they want about the proposal. So, for example, I did 10 acres that I had up at the harbor, they have 90 days, the DMF sends out a letter to every single abutter. Fortunately, nobody actually said a thing, so that was good, but it only takes one.
Does it only take one? That's
Yeah,
my
I mean,
question. Does it only take one butter to?
In the head of the harbor, one of those abutters is 10 lawyers. I mean, that's what they could.
I'm not asking about that.
Oh, yeah, but everyone
I'm
has,
asking, how many does it take?
I'm sure it's.
Should I ask this question?
So-
The question is, how many abutters does it take to say, I don't want that to stop the approval process? One, or is it a majority? Is it
I don't know, because they didn't.
Okay,
nobody said
so,
what.
thought you said you, but you did, sorry.
No, but
But, so that's a question that I have for somebody. Does it take just one? And if that's the case, then that's a big consideration. If you've got in 2011, 113 abutters that you queried, and now you might have 200 because of the dynamic of what's changed up there. If you just get, if it only takes one, then that needs to be considered when you're going to ask somebody to go survey these expertise.
So I can try, would they solicit public comment and they open up those public comment windows, whether it's DMF or at least for someone like a MEPA permit or a different state permit, and they open those comment windows up? The issuing authority takes those into account. I know this is not gonna be the answer you'd love to hear. I don't think they have a set, like, we get one negative comment, it's done. I think they look at it in the assessment of the town and some individuals are petitioning, these are what we believe the impacts to be, we've received this comment from the abutter. We don't believe that that's enough to say that, but that's totally within their discretion to decide. Having seen not that just aquaculture projects, but larger projects, like we'll just use. I know when the town dredged the Pulpus Harbor entrance channel most recently. During that process, that permitting process did receive some negative comments through state permitting. But it ultimately didn't end up with the town getting told no. There were some other conditions, maybe some time of year things. Aquaculture probably works a little bit differently, but I think it's something where I think they try to use common sense to say, we sent this out to 130 people. We got one negative comment. We think it's pretty negligible, so we're gonna go ahead and proceed, or maybe it's something that they say. We're gonna proceed, but to address that single concern is. We're gonna put this restriction. So unfortunately don't think there's like we get 5 or percentage or whatever it is, we're just gonna say no. I think they always try to make every effort to permit it unless it's so overwhelming.
Thank you for that. Sorry, Simon.
No, it's fair. I mean, my point is this, is that a lot of the people who are buying, like, for me, example, the head of the harbor, those guys, they may only have one of them, but they could make it, they elongate the process just because they can afford to do it.
That was
May not
the
affect
original
the
question.
outcome of the project.
What does it take for someone to slow this down the approval process. if you
Yeah,
wanna go
I mean,
forward.
those guys have so many laws that they can actually do all day long.
I would imagine it could just be one person. That could throw a wrench in the works. So, the way things. That's just probably what we've seen around here.
Yeah, the other question for
Yes.
the oyster farmers.
Go ahead, Peter.
The oyster farmers besides Sean, so you can't answer, sorry. So. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that there's no life on the bottom. In those 6 slots, so I see right there, so it's all set.
Yeah.
Then, would you guys be good with just Sean working that? On a year-round basis? Would you guys be good with that, since he's proclaimed to us that he needs that for his business to work? In conjunction with the deep water, would you guys not press to also be in that area? Based on what your current operations are? So in other words, would you? Not
I mean,
take,
it's a tough question, because it's a very tempting spot to have as well, you know?
right,
I say, my principal concern is about losing my overwintering site rather than Sean having that area to use. And if we're all given the opportunity to use that area, we'll all use that.
right,
It's my opinion. anyway.
I would absolutely use it.
You would,
I would do exactly what Sean is doing if it was allowed.
I don't think that's your question. I understand what your question is. We can
Yeah.
all sit on our hands and say we don't want to try for it as well.
right,
But I think that would be a tough one for me to answer right now. I mean,
or this, if you, and then maybe this is Tara and Jeff, but. If they could all use that as year-round. They then also. Could it also then be dual purpose? Used as overwintering when it was time to overwinter. So,
Well, if it's open and available year round, they can use it year round for whatever they need for their growing purposes.
I think the issue that we have is that, not the issue we have, Sean would like to use the entire area. And if that can be happened, that's great. I don't have any issue with that. My issue is if requires re-permitting of the whole area, what happens if it gets closed down? And it may not even happen. It's like, who knows? And, you know, Sean may be right. The DMF isn't out in the business of closing this down, but they have rules that they have to follow.
so they have,
And I can't, you know, and my concern is this, is that if that's the case, are the DMF gonna give me 2 years to try and locate another area for my overwintering? Or they're just gonna shut me down? And I can't answer that question. I don't, nobody in this room probably can answer that question.
so the DMF does, if he wants to do it there, they do have to go and
But that's-
re-review it.
Did the letter say that, Sean? I know what you said.
They would have to. Survey the shoreline as it sits outside of.
Oh, so if they're just gonna survey the shoreline, there's nothing there, it's sand. There,
Well, I'm sorry to keep talking to Attorney Andy, but I think that. We as a group, since we're. Some of us resist this, but some of us, but all of us, I think, want to see it work for them if it can possibly work for everybody without harming everybody. So we should maybe get well versed in how the process goes. What do they mean by the shoreline? Do they mean the actual shoreline, or they mean this much water or whatever? Get clarification so that if the process is initiated, no one's going to worry about the whole thing going away because they found a periwinkle, you know?
Right, so like. Sorry to interrupt, when I read. The email from Alex. From the DMF. The part that raises my question and concern. And understanding is it specifically says. In order to extend the site to include use of the tidal shoreline. DMF will require that be proposed at a public hearing, be surveyed by the Division of Marine Fisheries, and go through the permitting process like a new site. I think that's. We would need to ask. Him specifically, if that then is. Are they creating a new site of just the little slice, or is the whole site? Because it's not super clear, and if they're gonna reevaluate the whole 12 acres I think that's the concern, is that it may not re-qualify. And I think the other part of it too, right, is obviously when you're dealing with fixed acreage and acreage restrictions, this is not a non-overcomable hurdle, but it needs to be taken into account. If that's a 2 acre site, and you add on an 8th acre, made a math, we'd have to figure it out. When you add on an 8th acre to connect it from what the boundary is to the shoreline now, to maintain it as a 2 acre site, you would have to lose 1/8 of an acre on the back end then too. And the reason why that's important is that the state caps at 10 acres. So if you have 4 and 4 out in deep water, you can't go to 10 and 1/8. So you'd have to. It's a math problem, right? You're just figuring out areas. It's not a hard math problem to figure out, but you'd have to figure out if that needs to adjust to accommodate that. I think that's the least of the worrisome hurdles. I think it's more of how they view evaluating that site, either in totality or just the brand new sliver, because I don't find that to be definitively clear.
So we know what they're looking for. I'm sure there's a few divers. Maybe just go out and dive the thing, see what we see before we talk to them.
Someone could certainly do that.
There's nothing on the bottom out there. It's dead. I've snorkeled it many times. Just to comment on the potential, of them seeing that there was any kind of seed there. It says right here in the manuscript, removal of bay scallop seed from licensed area. In the event that a significant amount of bay scallop seed sets within the boundaries of a licensed aquaculture lease, every effort shall be made to remove and relocate the seed by the licensee and the Department of Natural Resources. So if there's bay scallop seed out there, it should be dredged off immediately anyway. And it shouldn't go to state survey for them to say, oh, there's scallops here, we can't grant this usable for you. Scallops migrate, they move around. It's our responsibility to monitor those sites and say, look, guys, there's some scallop seed. I don't know if JC noticed or not, but we should probably get this seed off our site so the fishermen can go and catch it this winter. That's our duty. It's in the rule book.
I mean, we moved 14 million seed last year, so we do that. And, if there ever was some in there, we definitely would do it. I think the state is also gonna come in and do some sediment surveys and check out if there's any soft shell clams or clams and stuff. Have you noticed anything there?
Bill Hogs, and it's like, it's a big sandbar and then a mucky channel that comes between the two creeks. So it's really, I wouldn't throw a dredge there personally, ever.
I mean, the last time they came out in 2013, they came out with essentially like little hand garden rakes and picked their way along. So they look, I mean, it's not like they just visually scan it and call it good, and they look for it. But I mean, we could certainly ask Alex for clarification on, does that mean the 12 acres in totality or just the new slice for a new site? I think I personally read that as they would look at the site in its entirety as a whole new site. That's how I would read that, but I would certainly ask them for clarity before making that determination, because that's what you read. So, again, I only saw that email for the first time today, so I haven't had a chance to talk to them.
Thanks, Jeff. Matt?
Would I be right in making the assumption that the most important first step in all of this right now is to contact Conservation Foundation and the trustees to find out, since they own the property, that that's an activity that they would be willing to entertain on their property? Because if they aren't, then does that render everything else moot? And just as a guideline of like your first step, like what's the first step? Go talk to those people, find out if they're a yay or a nay, and then if they're a nay, then does that end it?
But
Is
even
that like thumbs down after that?
for you, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Peter.
in answer to that, either way, you should check with them, but we should find out the limit of their property. Because if it's in the water and it's land under the ocean, then it's not, they don't own that.
But isn't the requested land that we're looking at is the intertidal, which is the area between the low water mark and the high water mark is the valuable area for growing. It's
But-
not so much the behind of it that you want. You want those 4 or 5 rows of cages on the beach so that you can get all the advantages of the wave action and the air drying and all of that. I would think the rest of it's kind of,
It should be clarified by the whoever. It should be clarified, but I think either way, you should, foundation. Should talk to format, either way. I mean, that, yeah, I agree, that's the first step for sure, but
because if he said no, then what would be the second step?
how much further out into the water Sean would wanna go, I guess, until he wasn't on their property. I mean. You would have to find out where. Their property line is in the water, right? So then, if he was outside of that, then. Then we need, of course, we still need clarification from DMF, right? So those are 2 places right away. And it's 8 minutes before 7, so we're not gonna solve it tonight. So we need more answers, right, Andy?
Yeah, I was just having the same feeling where, going to, accomplish, but we've certainly got a lot of out in the open here. As far as the boundary goes, like Jeff says, we can't sit here and go back and forth about a boundary. Oftentimes Conservation Foundation has a boundary, even out on Co2, they have some that are very plain to see. I've been down to this area myself quite a few times, as Mr. Bray says, I'm sure, many times. Have you ever seen a boundary marker there for Conservation Foundation?
No, well, they're not gonna have one. It's not gonna be sitting in the water. There might be a post.
No, up in upland areas somewhere. They may not have it, at the corner, but it may be in a line here somewhere.
Well, there's trustees signs everywhere, but
Yeah.
the foundation. But one more thing to remember is that if the foundation does do an oyster reef there as part of its resilience project, they're gonna have to get that area declared before they can do that thing in the water there. So, that's something to remember when you go and talk to them.
There's a lot of life in that pond. Jeff,
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think as far as that goes, right? Again, that. GIS is always kind of the best guess, but I think if you look at it and you simply extend these property lines out onto the map of GIS, you can see where they're gonna intersect. On a piece of land. I mean, those coordinates are fixed, they're where they're published. It's where they're gonna be, I think, my personal opinion, if you extend those lines out, they're gonna intersect the piece of land that's owned by the Conservation Foundation. But I think you can simply bring them both in. That's where they're gonna intersect. Yeah. Conservation Foundation says, no, thank you, then I think that discussion is done.
Sean,
I've spoken to Diane Lang, like I said, pretty extensively about this topic, and she explained that their jurisdiction ends at the median high tide mark. It's like that at Great Point, it's like that on all their properties. Again, I think we really need very clear language of what the Massachusetts state law is as far as what is public waterway and what is private land, because I know we have very strict laws in Massachusetts concerning that. It was my understanding that we as public people have access to the median tide mark, that you can walk at dead low tide on anybody's private property because it's not private property. That's been my understanding growing up here, being a shore fisherman and shell fisherman on this island. Diane also explained to me that specific site, it's very close to the border of what would be conservation and trustees. Basically, from her understanding, that line is Haulover Creek. South of Haulover is conservation, north of Haulover is trustees and gets into the Cascada Forest realm. So getting a very clear picture of where that line is, I agree would be very helpful in understanding. The Conservation Committee says, no, there's no, business to be done on our property. I understand that. I wouldn't argue anything to do with that. If trustees is saying this is our property and we're fully in support of Mr. Fitzgibbon's activities here. We see aquaculture as a benefit to the ecosystem in the area and to visitors, which is their priority as an entity. They are, like I said, I've got nothing but support from them. So I'd be very happy to reach out to Jen Carberg or whomever would be most important to talk to with the conservation to get their standpoint, maybe get them at one of these meetings if they can help clarify.
They must have already said yes when Jim Lentowski was alive, because they must have been asked, right?
Well, the lease has an existing subtitle, so it's not
It's not
within,
visual.
it's not within the intertidal zone, or it's certainly not within the property boundaries, I think, very intentionally so.
Sean, you got legwork.
That's fine,
That's the way I see it.
that's fine. I was hoping
And,
hoping to get some legwork to do.
keeping in mind you're in this together with everybody else at the end of the day. It's, these are leases created all on top of each other. And, everybody's gotta somehow work together, and come to agreements. It sounds like, you have options to move forward at a certain level on your own. And, we here at SHAB simply wanna see activity and wanna see you survive. I think I can safely say that for the board. Anything else?
Can I just add, get documentation, get it written. If the foundation says, yeah, let's do it, then get a letter. The same thing about the boundaries and whatever else you get going forward, get documentation so you can create a chronological order of how things happen and you have your evidence as opposed to saying, yeah, this guy told me.
I've learned that lesson.
Okay.
I definitely go to the Conservation Foundation with that. That's a fine line there. And you can start with Jen. Ultimately, it's gonna be Cormac, I imagine. I don't think they react, respond, or think the same as the trustees. So, best of luck with that.
Cormac's a different personality to the Conservation Foundation. He's not beset on all sides by lawyers who want to, barbecue it. Well, when he was at the land council, so he's in a better mood.
I know they wanted to, have better access for vehicles.
Yeah.
There's a huge puddle that's keeping that from happening there. And it's basically, a culvert would need to be installed and it's possible, that was frowned upon. And, that would be the only thing I would know. Cormac, is wonderful with what he does and he's perfect for that position. So, his decisions need to be respected.
Just a really quick question for Jeff or whoever's gonna contact the DMF and find out what they decided on. Are they gonna do the 2 acres or just the land? Because that would ease my worries tonight. So if we know the DMF is not gonna redo the whole site, then that makes my life a lot easier, a lot less stressful. You see what I'm saying? So I don't know, which, would you contact them, Jack, or would?
Yeah, I got a copy of that response today, so I'll
Yeah,
probably
so
follow
I
up
mean,
with Alex.
honestly, if they just say, hey, we're just gonna do Sean's 2 acres, then whatever.
Thanks, Simon.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'd just like to circle back. It's two questions, but you guys are talking about activity, how you like to see what the places get used to. So Jamie Marks has got till next summer to produce something out of there. That's just like,
I mean, you're not gonna see activity, I guess there's not a whole lot of maintenance to co-hogging, as far as I know, is in comparison to oystering, anything beyond that, the answer's gotta come from NRD here.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
there's a,
If he's meeting his minimum
his plan
requirements
was, he's,
for
he was
activity,
saying like next year, he was gonna harvest. Kind of. Go out to it.
it has to be actively working. And there's some understanding, right? And this was a big debate during Ted's discussion is what is actively working? Is it selling? Is it stocking? I think it's showing and, you know, kind of the guidance from this board at the time was it's actively showing effort to produce shellfish. Sometimes it's not within your control that you're gonna have marketable stuff every year, so. Jamie converted from oysters to clams, and I know he's communicated to you, he's talked to the warden and to the EPL about where he is with his status, he's provided information that he's been adding seed and doing things. And I think he would start his normal non-use cycle when he stops working his lease. So if people have questions about what he's doing on his lease, we'll find Jamie.
Yeah.
Talk to him about his lease.
well, he's certainly submitting what he's supposed to submit to you as far as his activity, so. I understand there's been some questions, Jamie's been there a long time. You know, he has to meet the criteria just like everybody else. That, I know it's questionable because he's not seen there, especially like he used to be. His explanation to me simply was, is no maintenance required, I've got my stock planted. I would leave it up to from there, if there's an issue. You've got to talk to NRD or Shellfish Constable. So,
If questions on something, please go ask Lisa.
yeah, start with Jamie. Alright.
The other part was, John's other 4 acres, I know you guys were saying like there's a bunch of process. On it or something like that, the other side. But maybe like a ballpark, if it like next summer is allowed to use those other 4 acres in the deep water. You know, it's hard to say, like,
Yeah, I mean, certainly, why don't, just for everyone, since it's come up, is we'll provide a estimated schedule for everybody.
That'd be hugely helpful as a planning farm next year.
Okay. You've heard it here. Anything else on aquaculture? Leases discussed tonight. From the board, from the public.
I'll just throw one more out there for thought. If the request to create some tidal shoreline access site were to have less of a physical or potential impact on the other farmers, would this be facilitated in any kind of a better fashion? Better, like faster fashion, if we were to maybe look at another site within NT5, or given recent developments with the bird deterrence, the potential shutdown of Nantucket Main Harbor oysters, would it not make sense to maybe push for something in Natticut Harbor, where if they're gonna shut down one area, we would still have some area potentially usable? I'm not trying to step on these guys' toes in any regard. They're doing their job. They do a good job at it. I'm new in this business. However, I see plenty of demand for shellfish on this island in the world. So is there a way that we could maybe, you know, navigate around some of these obstacles to achieve the same goal, end goal. You don't have to answer that right now, but maybe we could think about that as a productive solution towards what I'm requesting. It doesn't have to be that spot, even though I think that spot is ideal. What I'm asking for is something that Matt voiced very clearly, he would love to have access to as well. Simon and Matt, they use shallow water, so they have that to use. So does Emil. That's something that Matt and I don't get, and we could benefit immensely from.
Carol, please.
I think just speaking from experience, from working with everyone here, what is helpful is for you to do some legwork and like get in with your snorkel and your mask and check those sites out.
I've done that.
Well, get some numbers down and like let us know, because we have like 60 dives coming up that we have to do, so. I think like if you can scout some areas and come up with some ideas for us to like professionally survey and have done, that would help speed things along. Cause it's not really a priority, you know, when we have these other grants that we're working on that we have to do it.
So is that maybe a yes? That an ulterior site might be a better option? to
I don't
move forward
know.
with this?
Yeah, I mean,
It's good to have options.
again, like we said earlier, we're happy to look at other sites, but we need the information to review. Right now, we only deal with the sites that are qualified and licensable for aquaculture.
So at our next meeting here, should I provide GPS coordinates and pictures of other locations that I've surveyed within Nantucket's boundaries for potential use?
More information, the better.
Yeah, anything
That's
that you,
basically what Rob Garrison did. With his Shimo site, he came to the meeting and said, this is what I wanna do. I don't know why it didn't happen, I think I could look through, I was on the shad board then when that went down, I might have some notes and some pieces of documentation from that. Seemed like a good plan to me, I don't know, I think it was an abutter thing, but.
yeah, I mean, obviously there's land access issues and things that go with it, so as much as you can vet out all of those requirements. That was helpful.
Do you have access to underwater video? Do you know Chris Fuller?
Yeah, I could get some kind of water video.
Yeah,
I don't think you need a video. I think you can just visually assess it.
Yeah, some sort of write-up.
Because it doesn't matter like what you see, the DMF is still gonna come out, but it would just be nice not to like waste time if.
They're not gonna waste their time.
all right.
Thank you.
Anything else on this? We will not be meeting September 17th. So our next meeting, October 1st. Unless we call for something before or in between those times. Any discussion on Vineyard Wind? Not tonight. Anything new? Water quality testing?
Still doing that.
Okay.
I have a question. Are you coordinating with Mariah Mitchell? Those buoys that they're putting out there? Are they giving you that data? Or-
Not as of yet.
Okay.
Hopefully in the plans that they will share information.
Jeff. Thanks for being here tonight. Sorry, thank you.
Thanks to everybody for coming here.
Thank you all. If there's nothing else to discuss tonight. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Anderson, seconded by Mr. Grace to adjourn. All in favor? Mr. Anderson,
Aye.
Mr. Grace,
Aye.
Mr. Bossy.
Aye.
Yeah, both sides as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.